Okay, good evening, everyone. Today is the 20th of November, 2024. We are continuing the Foundations of Angel Wing online series. This is the sixth presentation in the current series. We're starting right from the beginning of the book, the very first section of it. And just as a quick review from last time, there was this distinction made between the self and subjectivity. And this was made by various researchers. Please do keep in mind that this is a technical presentation. It is a bit intricate and a bit evolved in terms of the concepts and ideas being presented. But I can certainly, make it a little bit simpler if anyone has any questions or comments, and make it more understandable, perhaps. I'll try to do the best I can with it. So a quick review from last time that. Well, let's look at the slide here for a moment. The slide states here, it's essential not to mix up the concept of having a self, a unique sense of who we are, with the broader idea of subjectivity. While they are related, self and subjectivity are different. Subjectivity refers to the wide range of thoughts, emotions, and viewpoints a person can have. It's about all the experiences someone can encounter, not just the individual sense of self, right? So there's a distinction made here between the self and subjectivity. We experience all kinds of thoughts and feelings, emotions, viewpoints, memories. All of that is quite subjective. That's what's meant by subjectivity. That's one way to think about it. So then what is the self? It's the sense of me, who I am. So they are related together, but they're not. But they're two different constructs. All right. So let's take a look at the some of the notes on the right side here. This slide explains the distinction between self and subjectivity, emphasizing that while they're related concepts, they serve different roles in understanding personal experience. Here are 5 examples to clarify the difference. So first example is personal identity versus emotional response. Suppose someone identifies as a dedicated environmentalist. This self-identity reflects their core values and defines who they are as a unique person. However, if they experience anger when seeing pollution or deforestation, that emotional reaction is part of their subjectivity. While the self, as an environmentalist, shapes the reaction, the anger itself represents a broader subjective experience that extends beyond identity, reflecting how they interact with external events. Now, I hope that makes sense. Now, let me see if I can explain that a little bit more clearly. The example of an environmentalist, that's just a person's that's part of their psychological identity with their core values. But the experience overall of seeing deforestation, seeing pollution, it produces all kinds of emotional reactions like anger. And that represents broader subjective experience that extends beyond personal identity. Now, why? Why is that the case? Why is there a broader subjective experience? And where does that even come from? And that's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting way to separate that out. The broader subjective experience is that, let's say, if I'm an environmentalist, I don't like to see deforestation. I don't like to see pollution. I don't like to see trees damaged, things like that. This is just an example. So the whole experience I have of being maybe in a forest or being in a mountainous range and seeing all this damage is an extension of my psychological holding on to that identity of being an environmentalist. We might be able to say that the subjective reaction to the external environment is due to the personal identity, to the identity of the self, that this is part of who I am. I'm an environmentalist. I am someone who's identified that way, and I've incorporated that within myself. So this goes to speak to the fact that our individual identity has many sub-identities within it. The person could be an environmentalist, could be a Democrat or a Republican politically, could be a very staunch religious follower of some sort, could be a very caring and loving parent, things like that. There's so many pieces to identity that all come together. And then from that entire mixture, there is subjective experience, which is much more intricate and more complex than that relatively cohesive identity. Very interesting. Very interesting. How does that happen? Why does that happen? I mean, there's a lot of ways to perhaps think about it. And this is one of our foundational ideas, the discovery of the self. The discovery of the self is what we want. It goes to the question, who am I? Why am I here in this world? What do I have to do in this world? Things like that. Let's look at another example here. Career identity and daily experiences. A doctor may strongly identify with their role as a healer, which is a central part of the self. The person might say, I'm a doctor, I'm a healer. That's a central part of the self, like part of the self, not the spiritual self maybe, but could be, but more of the psychological self. However, the wide range of thoughts and emotions that doctor experiences throughout the day, empathy for a patient, frustration with paperwork, pride in a successful treatment, are all part of their subjectivity. So these subjective experiences give depth to their day, but are also broader than just identity as a doctor. You see, so that's another example. The identity is of a doctor, but there is a much broader range of experiences that are quite subjective, that are related to the identity, related to the sense of who I am. Okay, so that's example number 2. Example number 3 is cultural identity and diverse viewpoints. A person may identify as belonging to a special or to a specific cultural group, which provides them with a sense of self and belonging. And that happens all the time. People belong to different cultural groups, and that promotes a sense of self and belonging, that I belong to this group, I'm part of it. It brings some stability to the self, things like that. However, their subjectivity includes their exposure and reactions to other cultures, other traditions, and other perspectives. Right? So when a person belongs to a particular group, that individual is able to, identify with that group, a sense of belonging, sense of oneness, things like that. But then when there are different traditions, different groups, the whole reaction can be quite different. So for instance, such a person might admire one's cultural art or food, which expands their subjective experience beyond the confines of their own cultural identity. So one may have a cultural identity, but it's expanded further due to the fact that there is there's appreciation or admiring another culture. So this is the cultural identity example. Now how is this relevant for us? Well, this example goes to illustrate that we can grow and learn much, much more. We can develop further our inner identity by greater exposure to diverse traditions, foods, cultures, ways of practicing, things like that. That can be extremely helpful, right? So that's cultural identity. And then the fourth example here is introvert identity versus social interaction. Some might define themselves as an introvert, which reflects the self. However, their subjectivity encompasses the range of experiences that they have in social settings, from enjoyment at a close friend's small gathering to feeling overwhelmed at a crowded event. These social experiences are part of their subjectivity and not strictly tied to their identity as an introvert, showing how they process and feel in different situations. So someone could have an introverted identity, but that expresses itself, or the overall subjective experience is much more diverse given the circumstances, given the situations. And this is what happens in our lives. We have certain conditioning, certain way of seeing things. That's fine. But then given the diversity of interaction, things change, certainly. Our Experience is different. If someone might say, well, I had a great time at that party, or I had a great time at that park, but then I wasn't very happy, with the family gathering, and stuff like that can happen all the time. That's the subjectivity, you see. So these points are foundational in eventually understanding the self-mastery construct. The self-mastery construct is what I want to really get to, and that's what the entire Angel Wing program is about. It's one of our 3 guiding principles. But to get to that, to be able to move into that space of self-mastery, that life of self-mastery, there has to be the best integration between the self and subjectivity. When we are experiencing diverse interactions, when we have diverse interactions with people, with loved ones, with relatives, with co-workers, with animals, with friends, with pets, doesn't matter. Those are all subjective experiences. That's what they are. But they are subjective only in relation to the psychological self. That psychological sense is the sense of my personal identity. And if we don't have that, we wouldn't be able to function in the world. So we have our personal identity. But what is that personal identity? Are we aware of it? Are we limited by that? Are we stuck by that? Or are we able to be in it in the most happy, functional, good possible way? So the relationship with self-mastery is where the subjective, qualitative experiences that go on throughout the day can be masterfully navigated in, and that those experiences do not cause disturbance to our identity, but in fact enhance our identity further. And the enhancement of identity further is what could be said as growing further from where we are. It's good to be in a state of growth rather than to be stagnated. So to be in a state of growth means to keep evolving, keep developing, keep learning new perspectives, keep trying to see other people's points of views. What does that do? It fosters communication, fosters collaboration, it fosters harmonious interaction. It also fosters a greater search for the truth, irrespective of the dimension of experience or of life. So for example, if a person is a researcher in a laboratory, or they're doing some research, they can expand their perspective, their vision, by learning from others, by growing from other people's experiences. You see, we are sometimes so stuck in so many strong beliefs that there isn't enough flexibility to grow and develop those beliefs further. You can find lots of complementary ideas around the one belief one may have, and then progress along that basis. So for example, let's use a religious example. A person might believe they're a staunch follower of Catholicism, like a Catholic churchgoer, let's say, right? Catholic. But they can take good things from other denominations, other places, from Buddhism and from Hinduism and from Protestantism and from anywhere, it doesn't matter. You can find something that resonates, bring it inside yourself, and expand the subjective experience where there is further growth of the psychological self. The further growth of the psychological self is what is necessary, in my humble opinion as a presenter here, that is necessary for the actual discovery of the self and for self-mastery. If I'm going to master my mind, master my actions, master my interactions with others, I have to be masterfully be able to navigate through the subjectivity and enhance and develop the core psychological self. Okay, now if you have any questions or comments, please do stop me. I don't want to make it too esoteric or complicated, or anything like that. But it is a bit technical. Hopefully it's not too technical that is totally ununderstandable, So it's a most important probe into the question of who am I? It's a very relevant probe. It's a relevant probe because we have the capacity to ask, who am I? What am I? How do I function? Is my psychological identity completely static, or is it fluid? Can it grow? Now, I'm going to just give you my commentary. As I stated, this is, I'm presenting the researchers' ideas that have been presented in this 813-page book. But this presentation is presenting those ideas, but at the same time, this is Sachin's commentary. So I'm just making that very clear. That in my commentary, in Sachin's perspective here, is that we must be in a state of growth. Otherwise, we stagnate. So the core identity is growing and developing. It can't be stuck in old patterns, in an old place somewhere. So it has to grow. And it grows by greater interaction with the world outside, but the quality of the interaction is the key. The quality of the interaction, one has to decide that, is this interaction taking my growth further? Or is the interaction taking it in some harmful direction? It can be, it can happen. Take family, for example. You could wind up talking to some family member where there was a lot of problem with that person in the past, and one could wind up regurgitating all old stuff again and again and cause even more damage to one's psychological identity. And so the subjective experience is also there, which is also bad quality experience, and it takes us backwards. It doesn't allow us to move towards self-mastery. It will take us to further degradation of the self. You see, so the decision to develop the self in a much more evolved manner it's a decision we can make, and in an angel wing, our contention is to encourage everyone who comes on board, and everyone who is attending these presentations or sessions in any capacity, to keep growing, to keep flowing, to keep evolving, to keep learning, to keep the mind further open, to open the mind further. That is our, that is at least my perspective. Let's put it that way. I can only speak for me. I'm a presenter in Angel Wing, and I'm sharing with you my perspective. Some other presenters will present their perspective. That's fine. And if you want to be a presenter, you can also be a presenter at some point. Just let me know, and we can always set something up. We have to set up some training and all that, but that'll come in next year or so. My point is that, we can, and this is again my commentary, we can and must develop our inner self further. For let's use a religious example. People who do regular Bible study. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the books of the Bible and the commentaries and theological interpretations, and you can keep going into it further. Is it good for the brain and the mind to learn new material? Yes. It's absolutely good for the mind and for the brain and for our health and everything else to be in a state of dynamic growth, to open the doorway into a state of dynamic growth. You see, that is our aim. That is our aim. So the foundations workshops, the ideas that we are presenting here, they all have to do with finding out how we can open this door further. Right now, in these slides and in the beginning sections of this book, this is just the research that is being presented, which is highly extensive, highly intricate, highly theoretical, and at the same time, it just goes to show how much depth of contemplation there has been on these questions by amazing researchers. Amazing researchers. No one can deny it. So as we move ahead, in this examination, even the word selfhood comes into the picture. So let's talk about that. Selfhood specifically focuses on the person's unique identity, how they see themselves as distinct from others and their environment. Yes, we are in one sense distinct from others and from the environment. We have our own selfhood. That's what that is, called, selfhood. It's unique identity. Do we have a unique identity? Yes, of course we do. And that's the beauty of each individual. Each individual's identity is unique. It is distinct from others' identities and the environment, and recognizing oneself as a unique individual is the foundation of selfhood. It differs from subjectivity by emphasizing personal identity. Selfhood is interesting because it seems to reach out beyond the physical body. This reaching out can be seen as an effort to understand and connect with the outside world, which is a core part of how we process and understand information. Now let's break that down. Let's really try to break that down step by step. So first of all, is there a unique identity? Yes, of course there is. I mean, there's one Sachin Karnik. There might be other people having the same name, but my identity is my own. I don't think anybody else has that exact same identity. There might be similarities, right? So that's the first point. The second point is to recognize myself as a unique individual and to really cherish that and to really hold on to that idea. Okay, so that's the second point. Now, selfhood differs from subjectivity by emphasizing personal identity. That this is my sense of me. This is not an egotistical thing that we're talking about. It's just a very clear, defined sense of who I am, my beliefs, my values, my thoughts, my emotions. Just the integrated clarity of who I am, the integratedness. That is selfhood. The selfhood is interesting because it seems to reach out beyond the physical body, right? I mean, I can say that, this is my physical picture. Somebody can take a picture of Sachin, and there's height and weight in the physical body and its dimensions. Yeah, that is there. But selfhood reaches out beyond the physical body. I have a sense of me that is not just the physical body. It's more than that. So that's the next point. And then this reaching out can be seen as an effort to understand and connect with the outside world, because our psychological self doesn't exist in isolation. It's always connected to the outside world in some way or another. But hopefully it's not lost in the outside world, but there's a connection with the outside world.